When me and Matt were first given the list of 6-word sentences, we decided to undertake a process of annotating them with our ideas and first impressions. This allowed us to determine which one we liked the best, and to also think about which would be easier to choreograph if a certain stimuli was chosen. Through this process, each of us began coming up with possible storylines for the stimuli. We also had an idea to merge some of the sentences together to create a more believable and in-depth story. However, eventually we decided that this would be quite difficult, and ended up only using one stimuli, which was, "Passengers, this isn't your captain speaking." But before we made this decision, we had originally chosen to merge the stimuli, "Passengers, this isn't your captain speaking," and "Because I lived, my hero didn't." The storyline we had been creating was of course quite somber, as we decided to go for a more literal interpretation of the sentence, which was of course a plane hijacking. We were going to try to make this somewhat comedic, but over time we saw that this may not have worked, so we decided to make this more serious. It was at this point that we also chose to use only one stimulus. So instead of having an opening scene that looks more like this, it now looks more like this. Even though we decided to use only one stimulus, we didn't want to lose the emotion that the other sentence could have contributed. So we decided to adapt the story to counteract this. In the story there are two pilots. Of course one of them is the hijacker. However, we didn't want to portray the hijacker as a completely soulless human being, unlike in our original story where he would have just crashed the plane. So we decided to give both the pilot and the hijacker some depth, in that they both have dreams which of course wouldn't be realised, which fits in very well with our choice of music. Another idea we had was to base our story in 2001. This was of course influenced by the research we had done for homework after the class had ended. In research we found that the number of hijackings had been decreasing throughout the years. However, the number reached an all-time high in 1969. We decided to base it in 2001 because there was a much higher amount of casualties in 2001 than there were in 1969. Even though there were only 11 hijackings, the number of casualties reached to 268 counts. When looking at Jerome Robbins' approach to his choreography, we can see that he didn't put dance into his work just for the sake of dancing. His main goal was to portray a story through dance. It was this ability to tell story through dance that me and Matt were mainly influenced by. From the beginning, our main goal was to successfully implement dance into our story. And I believe we did achieve this, even to the point where me and Matt became concerned whether our dance was too pedestrian or not. This really helped with our choreography, as I feel it gave us a strong foundation to then make movement from. The previous times I have tried to make choreography, I feel the process and the making of the choreography was quite panicked and rushed, and that caused us to add a lot of dance just for the sake of dance to make sure that everything was complete. For me, it made it more difficult to make sense of what was going on while I was choreographing and performing the piece. In comparison to this piece of choreography, which I feel was really smooth and efficient and worked really well. I feel this has really helped me to see how important it is for there to be a through line or a storyline within a dance. When looking at Jerome Robbins' work, you can see that West Side Story was a big influence on our choreography. In example, in our piece you can see this move, which was obviously taken from the West Side Story beginning dance scene where you see this move. We did have thoughts to just use the move, but we didn't want our piece to be unoriginal or be subject to plagiarism. So we did change it slightly by adding in a jump. We also took this as an opportunity to repeat our motif, adding in the taking on and taking off of the headphones. In addition, we were definitely also inspired by Jerome's mix of dance and pedestrian movement to represent fighting in specific scenes, such as this. Which can be seen in our piece with movements such as this. As a choreographer, this has made me realise that in a piece there are times for dance and that there are times for pedestrian movement, and that pedestrian movement shouldn't be overused, even though it is a great tool to develop a story or push a plot forward. So how we choreographed was, we didn't spend the first couple of weeks actually choreographing, although we did create small sections and began tweaking them and other things. Our main emphasis was to make sure that our story was complete, and it was at the beginning of term 4 that the majority of our choreography was made. The movement was then created very logically, as each part of the story was translated into movement. In example, when we began choreographing, we wanted to portray a plane taking off at the beginning of the dance, to introduce the fact that the two people were actually pilots, and that they were in fact on a plane. The way we thought to do this was to have two chairs and tilt backwards. We had also had another idea where our backs would be facing the audience. This was implemented to sort of include them as if they were the passengers on the plane, and this would have been implemented to enhance the effect of the dance. However, this idea was scrapped due to its limiting the view the audience had. So instead of having an opening sequence that looked like this, we have an opening sequence that looks like this. To make the takeoff seem more realistic, we decided to focus on the prep sequence beforehand, and this is where the idea for our motif came from. We tried to utilize a range of choreographic devices to make the motif more impactful. For this we used repetition, as the motif is repeated 3 times throughout the piece, as you can see here. We also utilised symmetry and unison in our motif. In fact, we use symmetry and unison quite a lot throughout our choreography. We use this to show that the pilot and the hijacker are actually the same. They are both people with dreams and ambitions. However, due to the course of the story, those dreams and ambitions are unfortunately unrealised. The second time you see the motif is in the elevation, which is inspired by West Side Story. Here we use a fragment of the motif, taking out the side bend and only using the up and down motion. The final time you see the motif is at the end of the piece. After Matt becomes incapacitated, I perform the piece on my own. In this small performance, I wanted to contrast the way that I performed the motif to how I did in the beginning of the piece. In the beginning of the piece, the movements were quite sustained, and the dynamics were quite soft. However, at the end of the piece, the dynamics become a lot sharper, and the movement is more erratic. I did this to show the turmoil that the hijacker was going through, but I also did this to show that the hijacker was making a choice, and that this final decision was resolute. In addition, the fact that Matt was incapacitated opened the door to another choreographic device, such as asymmetry. However, he still mirrors my actions when we tilt forward. Another example of our use of choreographic devices is when we stand up in canon when Matt realizes I am an imposter. Finally, we used inversion when we leant forward in our chair instead of backwards, to symbolise the plane descending. This also means that we could class the takeoff as a motif, as it's subject to many choreographic devices. In example, it is subject to repetition, as it is repeated 3 times throughout the piece. It is also subject to symmetry, asymmetry, and unison.